Aloha, welcome to Fast, Healthy, and Ono Cooking's locally grown series, where we'll be focusing on locally grown produce that is inexpensive or easily grown. Learning how to cook and enjoy local foods could play a big part in supporting Hawaii's local food security. So we thank you for tuning in for this series. Tonight is the first in our series, and we'll be learning how to make baked uallah casserole, sauteed ginger chicken with uallah, and boiled uallah garlic mashed potatoes. We'll also be extending our program by 15 minutes so we can include a Q&A with special guest Dr. Hamjad Hamed from the College of Tropical Agriculture. My name is Lonnie Taylor, and I'm an AARP Hawaii volunteer. I'll be your host tonight. On behalf of our sponsors, Kaunoa Senior Services on Maui, Uallah Leaf Cafe at Windward Community College, and AARP Hawaii, welcome. For those of you
You are on mute, Lonnie.
It's just, okay, we just have to go back a screen. Back a screen. Oh.
Just go ahead and review the Zoom controls.
For those of you who are new or maybe unfamiliar with AARP Hawaii, we are a membership organization for people 50 and older, but what we do for everyone. We hope with this series, you can learn some techniques that you can use to build or maintain a healthy lifestyle. Let's do a quick bit of housekeeping. This is a picture of what you should be seeing at the bottom of your Zoom screen, on a PC, and possibly the top of the screen on an iPad. Everybody is currently on mute. If you want to submit a question or comment, please click on the button that says Q&A and type in your question. I will be monitoring the questions and making sure they get asked. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you may type your questions in the comments. We won't be using the raise hand command because questions will be submitted in the Q&A. The chat command isn't necessarily going to be needed unless you want to communicate a technical issue. Alice Swift, Dave DeWitt, and Jack Boland are standing by to help. We recommend that you select speaker side-by-side view rather than gallery view for this presentation. Do this by clicking on the upper right part of your screen. Once you are in that view, you can change the size of the slides or of the speaker simply by clicking and dragging on the middle bar. Finally, we have added closed captioning to this presentation for those who have difficulty hearing. You can turn this off on your end by clicking on the CC Live Transcript button in the lower right side of your screen and clicking on Hide Subtitle. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Chef Daniel Swift, who will be leading us through this cooking series. Oops. Oh.
Okay, coming up.
Dan.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, it's been a couple weeks. I'm rusty. Have the wrong button. Oh, welcome back, everyone. Thank you again, Alice and Lonnie, for the introduction, and everyone else for joining us tonight. We are focusing, well, this is a first in a series of 4 classes, as was mentioned, so we're sort of focusing on items that we all use and or at least see locally in a lot of dishes, and kind of showing some creative ways hopefully to utilize them, most of which are available, all of the ingredients at your local market. But we'll talk about that, and then we're fortunate to have today Dr. Ahmed share some probably more detailed and scientific information about tonight, uallah, and some of its uses and other things like that. So we're going to try to continue that throughout the series of the next 4 classes. And we're really excited to be back. And we thank you again for joining us. So, I mean, I'm excited tonight because obviously it's the Uallah Leaf Cafe. This ingredient and this product is what inspired the name of the cafe here in Windward, as it was a highly grown and harvested product in the area where Windward Community College sits. So that's what inspired the naming of it. That was prior to my coming here. But maybe Dr. Ahmed will be able to talk a little bit more about where it grows and grows really well. But this was one of the regions centuries ago that it grew really, really well. So a couple little items. We've got the 3 dishes to go through tonight, which is kind of a lot, but they're not overly complex, and they can sort of cook themselves in a little bit, or in a sense, and allow me to work on other things. But I did want to point out, just as usual, a couple tips and things when working with uallah or any potato. As you know, if you've watched the show, I'm from Idaho. So we grew up eating a lot of potatoes. This is a tuber. It acts when it comes into contact with heat, just like any other potato. And there's some kind of important things to take note of as we go through the process of cooking them that I'll mention to you as well. But they are high in vitamin C and A, which is a good benefit from them. There is a lot of sugar in many potatoes, this one included. So if you're watching your sugar intake, even though it's a natural sugar, you want to sort of limit probably the amount that you actually eat. They're high in antioxidants. Anthocyanin is the name of the antioxidant that's in all purple fruit and vegetables. So it is in the uallah as well. If you leave the skin on, it's a good source of fiber. I am actually going to leave the skin on a couple of these tonight. The recipes I wrote up had the skin removed in all of them, but that's sort of a choice that you make personally. If you leave it on, I just use a sponge and scrub brush and kind of clean them really well. And then you're certainly welcome to use the skin in the dishes. It's perfectly fine. And then I just made a note that it's good for moist heat and dry heat. Potatoes, which are tubers, which is what this classification is, are great for almost any cooking method, everything from deep frying, as you know, with French fries, through steaming and baking, roasting, fire roasted even is done, where they're wrapped with foil and put in hot coals. A lot of times that's done luau style. It can be done with callo or taro, which we'll work with in a couple weeks as well. So the first one I'll get started with is just the garlic mash, because that's going to take a little bit of time to cook. The ingredients are super simple. I've got the diced uallah, and depending on how long you want it to take to cook, that will dictate what size you cut. These particular pieces are sort of medium dice. I wanted them to be able to cook in about 15 minutes. So we made them a little bit smaller than normal. You could easily do large chunks if you have more time. Some people even boil quartered or halved potatoes, depending on how much time you have. But we're in a little bit of a hurry tonight, so I've diced those in medium dice. Actually, Steve helped me with that. Thank you, Steve, if you're out there watching. And then I have the garlic, and I have whole garlic cloves here. Sometimes you can smash it, or you can dice it or slice it. You can do whatever you want. But when I'm doing a garlic mash, I like to leave them whole, because they're going to boil, they're going to soften, and they're going to add the flavor to the liquid at the same time. And then when I mash them, they'll crush up. They'll become nice and soft. So I'm going to put those in whole. And again, it's up to you. You don't have to do them whole if you don't want to. And then I've got water, and I've got some coconut milk here. I think I put on the recipe, and it depends. You can use whole milk. You can use coconut milk. You can use skim milk. It depends on the variation you want to make in terms of the level of fat that you might want in it. I'm not including any butter in the finished product here, because the fat will come from the coconut milk. If you used a skim milk and wanted to put a little margarine or olive oil or some form of fat in at the end, I would recommend that, because potatoes with a little bit of fat, to me, makes for a lot better taste. So I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to add these two. And I really just want to cover them. Probably can't see into the pot that well, but I'm going to pour the coconut milk, and I'm going to pour the water. And that brings it right up to where all of the potatoes and the garlic are just covered. And the reason that that's important here is because I'm going to utilize the same liquid when I do the mashing of the potatoes. So they may be a little on the wetter side. When we get to that point, we'll pour off some of the liquid if we need to, and only add back as much as we want to make the potato the consistency that we're looking for. And then the last thing that I had as optional actually on this recipe was some lemongrass. So I went and picked up the lemongrass. We used to grow it here, but we're not really growing a lot of items outside the cafe right now. So I just picked up a little organic packet, and it's cut and trimmed. And sadly, the bulb, or most of the bulb, is missing. These are long stalks. If you've ever purchased or grown a lemongrass, it's basically a long stalk, and then it turns into a grass. And then the part that's the most flavorful and certainly the most tender is right at the bottom. It's kind of like a green onion. So I always shoot for utilizing that bottom portion. So there's a lot of different ways that you can work with this and incorporate it into the dishes that you're cooking. Something as simple as just crushing it. Sometimes I'll take just the back, not the sharp edge of my knife, but the back of the knife, and I can just pound it and crush it. That releases the oils, releases the fragrance, and this can just be dropped in and boiled with it, which I'll do today. And then it's easy to pick up and remove. So you'll get the flavor, but you don't necessarily have the fiber, and a lot of people don't like the fact that it doesn't break down while it's cooking. It's very fibrous. There's a couple other ways to utilize it too. You can also take a microplane or even maybe a regular zester. We have, and we've shown you guys some of the larger style zesters. This would work to make smaller pieces, but if you want them super fine, you want to go with a microplane. That will work as well. So if I were to just hold it over the pot and then just grate it gently, it will give me some super fine lemongrass pieces. I wouldn't need to use as much because it will stay in the dish. And then the last technique I have here is just a ginger grater, which works really well for that as well. You can just grate it to get a little bit of paste and crumb, and then you throw that in and it works just as well. So I'm going to let that kind of get going. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw them my way. I've got to watch this carefully so it doesn't boil over. I'll find out. And we just need to cook it until it's tender. It's probably going to take about 15 minutes or so. So we'll keep an eye on that.
I do have a couple of questions about the uallah. From Kit and from Bonnie, they have questions. Is the uallah the same as the purple Okinawan potato or the Korean sweet potato?
They are not exactly the same, no. Literally, there are hundreds of varieties of potatoes. What I would say, and it's hard to honestly, as someone from Idaho who loves potatoes and grew up eating them, it's hard to almost keep up with all of the different varieties that exist because there's a lot of crossbreeding and a lot of new varieties coming out. But there's really two primary categories for potatoes. And one is called a mealy potato. And that means that when it's cooked, it kind of breaks up and falls apart. So if you've ever had a baked potato where, they serve it at the restaurant whole and you squeeze it and it's all crumbly and falls apart inside, that's a mealy style potato, which is what uallah is. And then you also have what's waxy, what's called a waxy potato or a new potato. And those have a little different sugar content and those hold their shape. So when you boil those or cook those, they stay together. So they work well for like hash browns. They work well for German style potato salad. If you were to use an uallah, a potato for a potato salad and you boil it, you just got to be really careful. If you cook it too long, it just totally falls apart and disintegrates. So I've had Okinawan potatoes that are in both categories where they're deep purple, dark skin. One falls apart when cooked, one holds its shape. So there are differences between those two and the Korean potato as well. And there's probably a lot of subcategories also. So maybe that'd be a great question for Dr. Ahmed to answer for us a little bit later. I'm going to just heat this pan up for when we get to the chicken dish. I need this kind of nice and hot, but I'll show you really quick the casserole, which is super simple. We do a casserole here when the cafeteria is open. And we use kalo, we use uallah, we use a lot of different things. And for this recipe, I kind of streamlined it for us to make it a little bit more simple. I've got the same uallah cubed, about the same size, medium, maybe slightly larger. It will determine how long it cooks. So I've got that I'm going to add in here. I've got some diced onions that I'm going to add. And I'm saving time by not caramelizing this. Ideally, I would probably sweat my onions a little bit on the stove in a skillet to bring out the aromas and the flavors, but we're trying to make things fast and healthy, like I was talking about earlier. I've got a little bit of vegetable soup. So this gives me my stock. It gives me the liquid that'll cook the potatoes or part of it, and the vegetables and everything are in that. So you can use almost any type of soup that you want. If you want a cream style, if you want a broth style, this is a broth style one. I'm going to turn this down slightly. And in making it earlier, I made a full dish of it. I was thinking, oh, a cream of type soup would be really, really nice with it as well. But I also have, like, what goes in there is a little bit of coconut milk. So I'm going to add that. And remember, the coconut milk, it does have a high amount of fat in it. So I haven't found a really good quality low fat coconut milk, but they're probably out there. But what you can do is just dilute it with water. So you don't have to use pure, a full cup of coconut milk. You can use a quarter cup and 3/4 of a cup of water. And then I have a little bit of fresh thyme. And this is just thyme from the garden. So I'm going to sprinkle that inside. And I tend to crush it up when I sprinkle it to release the flavor and the aromas. And I know Jackie appreciated when we do the fresh herb classes or we incorporate them. I think we did thyme once and I showed how to strip it as opposed to going from the bottom to the top. We always go from the top to the bottom. And when you pull it down, it just strips all of those little leaves right off. Otherwise, your hand will run right over the top of them. And if you've got any other questions, feel free to shoot. I'm happy to answer them.
Sure. I just have a question from Danny. If substituting skim milk, how much olive oil, do you add for fat?
Just do it to taste. And I always add that at the end if we're talking about the potato. So once we drain it off and we mash it to the way we want it, we adjust the salt and then we would adjust the fat as well. So probably just a tablespoon or 2 would be fine. Margarine would work, any butter substitute, whatever healthy fat you're using at home works fine. So feel free to experiment and try that. And then this I just need to mix. I'm just going to incorporate the vegetables and the onions and the thyme, everything together. A little bit of our seasoned salt that we use here. It's got some herbs in it, the Hawaiian mamaki and things like that. I'll mix that around. And then I just have to simply pour this into the casserole. So you could really probably almost do this in the casserole itself. And the casserole is really just it's actually the name of the dish, the vessel itself. This is an aluminum pan, not necessarily a casserole dish. I only have one and it's in the oven right now with it. So that would be considered a casserole. So it's anything that's kind of put in that vessel and then baked in an oven. So this one will work fine for what we have here. And the last part to this dish is the topping. And I put cracker crumbs or bread crumbs. This is some fresh French bread that we ground up. And then we have some low-fat Parmesan cheese that we're going to mix together with that. And that becomes our topping. Yeah.
The uallah, is that right next to you?
Yeah, right here.
Linda wants to see the whole potato.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pull it over here. That's the star of the show. So I went down. These I picked up at times. Actually, Chef Steve picked them up for me. And then I went to our garden. We do grow these on campus. We didn't have any potatoes ready to harvest, but we did have the uallah leaf. And you'll see these growing even as ground cover around town. Down by the car wash in Kaneohe, their whole side of their building is covered with this. I don't think they're growing the potatoes, but they are growing it for potatoes, but they have the uallah there. And yeah, here's the potato itself, sort of a light colored skin. I'll split it in half. Put it out there for you to take a look at. And then I'm going to mix those two breadcrumbs and the low-fat parm together and create the topping for the casserole.
One of the questions that I have,
Yep.
how generalizable are these recipes tonight to other types of potatoes or tubulars, which are okay, which would not work?
They would work for any of them, honestly. The only thing I would say you might be cautious of is just the sugar content. Like I said, if you were to use a sweet potato or a yam, they have a lot of sugar in them, and it might be overpowering. You could even mix it with one russet potato and one uallah, or one sweet potato, one uallah, and mix it up a little bit and just get creative. So any type of soup, any type of potato, it's very versatile. You can get creative. That's one of the things that we try to stress here, is to make sure that the things that we're making can be subsidized by the items that you might have available at home in your fridge. So yeah, absolutely, you can mix it up any way you want.
So that would be ube as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the one thing I didn't put on the recipe, if you got the recipe or downloaded it, is normally you'll toss the breadcrumbs in a little melted butter or olive oil. But what we tend to do is just use like a vegetable spray, and I'm just going to hit the top of it. That helps it to brown a little bit, so that it's not just straight dried breadcrumbs with the Parmesan cheese. And then that would be ready to go in the oven.
A couple of questions about the lemongrass.
Uh-huh.
If you cannot eat lemongrass, is there a suggestion for a substitute herb?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything you want, really. I mean, you could use, ginger is close. This is just something to give it a little bit of a unique flavor, and sort of a South Pacific flavor, but ginger or galangal, the straight garlic would work. I mean, you could throw a cinnamon stick into that if you wanted to, a piece of star anise, any type of spice or herb that you like would work perfect for that. No problem at all. Yeah, and you can actually even eat the young leaves. They can be cooked. I ate some earlier raw. Not a lot of people do it, but it certainly can be picked and then chopped and used in dishes that you're cooking as well.
Okay, great. That was another question. They wanted
Yeah,
to know if
absolutely.
the leaves are edible. And I have a question, another question. After crushing the lemongrass, what is the next step?
I just threw it in the pot.
Okay,
Yep. So I can show it to you here. I think these are cooking along really good.
did you mix the Hawaiian momaki into this recipe as well?
It's in our seasoned salt, the one that we make here and sell. Well, we used to sell it. We don't anymore because we're not open, but the salt blend that we use, the Hawaiian salt, this has Kanei, Mamaki, Hawaiian salt, a couple different we have a bunch of different varieties, but this is our straight up Hawaiian one. So for tonight, that's the one that I'm using to season most of these dishes. Okay. And then the last one, I'm pretty close to being on time. I don't want to get scolded by Jackie on my first day back. Right, Jackie. When you're doing this dish, like the question that we had before about substitutions, you can absolutely substitute turkey instead of this. You could do tofu. You could eliminate the meat if you wanted to make it vegetarian, substitute it with a vegan style meat substitute, or just omit it completely. Any vegetable you want, it's totally up to you. What I like to focus on here is the technique, which is what I tend to like. And this is one that I share a lot with when I was teaching culinary arts. I haven't been doing that for the last couple of years, but it's really kind of a one pan item that allows you to get things cooking, gives you a sauce, it gives you a starch, it gives you vegetables and a protein all in one. So, but yet it's not a stew. It just depends on how you're cutting your product. So I've got a nonstick pan. It's kind of hot already. And it could be a regular skillet also, but nonstick, if you have one, tends to make things a little bit easier. And then I've got my ingredients here. So I'm using chicken. And then of course the sweet potato, I left the skin on and we cut rings. So we're gonna leave those like that. Some red pepper, a little bit of stock. It could be water also, but I have some chicken stock, so it goes well with the chicken. The garlic, green onions, and then I have some ginger. here that I sliced in rings. And ginger is very similar to lemongrass in that you can leave it in large pieces that are then removed or eaten around when you're serving it, or you can mince it up small and it gets eaten with the dish. Some people love it, some people don't like it. It's totally up to you how you want to utilize it, but I just cut discs tonight and that's how we're going to do it. And then I have this nice and hot, so a little bit of the olive oil. Got to be careful not to overdo it so that the items don't burn when you put them in. But hopefully I can get all this chicken into the pan. So I'm going to throw first in the oil, and then I could definitely throw in the ginger, and that flavors the oil. You'll see that in Chinese cooking, a lot of different styles of cooking. This is your opportunity to flavor the oil with ginger, or in this case, ginger and garlic. And because I'm doing that, I have the garlic cut a little bit larger. I don't want it too small. It would burn really, really quickly. I'm going to throw that in. That doesn't take much. I can throw in my chicken. This will flavor that oil really nicely. In goes the chicken. Most of it in there. I'm going to hold back a little bit on that because I want the sweet potatoes to be in contact with the oil as well. So I'm going to put those in, spread it around. Red peppers, and that could be anything. If you don't like red peppers, you're going to use another item, another vegetable. And what we try to do here is make sure that they'll all cook at about the same time. So I let that get nice and hot. I'm going to turn it all the way up now. Set aside my stock. I've got my green onions, and I've got a little bit of hot sauce here too. That's optional. You don't have to add that. But if you like it a little spicy, you certainly can. And you should be able to hear that kind of cooking. So while that's going and getting hot, I'm going to leave the lid off for the moment. Just let that heat. And I'm going to check my potatoes. So the easiest way to check them is just to grab one, take it out, and it's probably too hot to handle, so you can poke it with a knife, see if it's nice and tender. And it is. It will fall apart nicely now. I'm going to give it about another minute though, I think, and I'll be able to remove the lemongrass stalk and then mash it up. So while that's going, I'll prepare to drain a little bit of liquid and then add that back as we go. So I'm going to hit this with just a little bit of that seasoned salt. And when you load a pan like this really full, you'll see how it sucks the heat out of it, and it takes the recovery times a little bit more. So it was really nice and hot when we started. Then all that chicken and everything, especially if the items are cold, they'll pull the heat out of the pan. Takes it a little bit of time to recover. And then we should be able to toss it a little bit. You can mix it up. And coat that oil. Now everything's nice and coated with oil and the seasoning. I can use my green onions here. And tonight I'm just using Tabasco. I was going to use Sriracha, but I use that a lot. But any hot sauce or chili flake, if you want to add some heat, would work fine too. Or chilies from the garden work as well. And then here's my favorite part is just, we're going to also create our stock. So in a way, if you followed the class, we've done braising a couple of times. And this is sort of what this dish is. We've got the ginger in there. We've got the sweet potato. They're cut nice and thin. We tried to cut everything so it cooks at the same amount of time, about 7 minutes. We've got it nice and coated. We've got it seasoned. Got some nice color in there. And now as it's all mixed together, we just simply have to put in some stock. Or like I said, some water would work too. Up to you. And then all you have to do is put the lid on it. So we've gone from a dry heat method to a moist heat method, and that's going to steam the potatoes. It's going to finish steaming the chicken, yet we've got some browning started already, and we'll get that flavor. that translates into the sauce.
I have a
Any other
question for
Yeah,
from
go
Lori.
ahead.
Her house is plant-based. What can she substitute for chicken?
Oh, whatever your favorite plant-based protein is, you could use legumes. Edamame in here would be great if you were to substitute that with the nice shucked edamame. It's easier. Or some of the larger ones. I don't know if you can find fava beans shucked, but a lima bean, or you could use tofu or any substitute. If you're not using fish or shellfish, you wouldn't want to use those, but you certainly could if you were eating fish. You could do boiled eggs. It just depends, but any protein, any source of protein would work good in there. Yeah.
And the seasoning for the chicken?
I just did the same straight salt. And at the end, I'm going to put in a little basil, little Thai basil. I brought some herbs from the garden. It's got the green onions in it, of course, and the garlic and the ginger. So that's seasoning, but that's more on our herb side or spice side. And then just salt is just the standard seasoned salt that we use here. But any regular salt and pepper would work fine.
Okay.
Totally up to you.
I have a question from Laurie. She says, do you eat the potato leaves, purple, white, orange potatoes, if they have leaves?
If they have leaves from the plant, well, like these, which would be harvested from the garden, the young leaves are fine. But I think if you're talking about sprouts that might come from the potatoes in your pantry, then you don't want to eat those. I'm not sure if that's the aspect of the question that you're talking about, but yeah, you don't want to eat the sprouts and stuff that are coming from potatoes that you're storing. But if you're growing them, uallah, the leaves are no problem to eat. The young ones, these could be cooked up with your dish or chopped up and added towards the end as well. And then you can sort of see there's not a lot of liquid here. So I actually don't even think I need to pour it off. If I pour it off, I'll just be putting it right back in. And that's going to be up to you. Like I said earlier, if you want a kind of a dry mashed potato, you might want to pour all of that off and then add it back as you need it. This might be a little on the dry side. I might need to add a little bit of water or coconut milk or something in the form of liquid to get it back to where we want it. And then I'm just using a potato masher. You can find these at the supermarket. You probably have one in your pantry. A fork would work, a slotted spoon, anything to sort of crush it because it's already nice and soft. I'm just smashing the garlic and the potatoes. And you can see in there, it's got that liquid. It's also got, the whole cloves of garlic are still there, but they're just really soft. So they just fall apart. And yes, that's hot. That hurt my finger.
How thick were the slices of that you sliced the potatoes?
The ones that we put in there were about 1/4 of an inch thick, but there's a lot of leeway there also. It's totally up to you. You just have to keep in mind that you want your chicken, you want your peppers, you want your potatoes, everything cooked to perfection at the same time. So the bigger the pieces of potato, then the bigger you need your pieces of chicken or tofu or whatever else you might be cooking. So that's a nice variable for you. Okay. And then I'm just mashing this up. And I am gonna, I want to adjust the seasoning. This is the opportunity to do that. But it's got that beautiful color that we've all come to know. I remember moving to Hawaii for the first time in the 90s, and this was a popular item served in the restaurants. And I just thought it was so beautiful because we didn't use a lot of the purple potatoes in Idaho. I'm not sure they allowed them to be imported, actually. They're probably growing them there now, but they weren't at the time. It was all russets and some Washington potatoes also. So that does need a little bit of salt. You'll notice potatoes, even uallah or any type of potato, they'll tend to soak up a lot of salt. So a little bit of salt in there to give it another taste. And that's about right. I'll let that sit for a minute. to get ready to plate everything up, and I can check on my chicken. Be careful if you've got a lid on there. When it's boiling, it's going to be hot. So you know, check the handle first. Use a towel. I'll just use a pair of tongs to pick it up. Take a look, and it is. I can tell that's done. Yeah, those potatoes. Again, I can come back and use just a knife. They're nice and tender. It goes right through them. The chicken's done. And the beautiful thing about this, as I mentioned earlier, is you have your sauce and everything's there together as well. So I'm just going to reduce the heat, put it on low. I could reduce that sauce even more if I wanted to. I could add a little bit of cornstarch slurry to tighten it up and make it more of a glaze, like a stir fry style dish. But I think for this, I'm just going to put it on low as I get to plating. I got a couple minutes. That will be a perfect consistency for the sauce that I want. Because you got to keep in mind that you also have the starches in the potato. So as you boil the potatoes down, you end up with the liquid thickening slightly because of the starches that naturally occur in the potato. Same thing with pasta or any starch that you're cooking, you're going to get that. And then I'm just going to pour this right onto here. You can see that sauce. I'll pour it out first a little bit. So it's thickened a little bit. It's changed its color. Not quite a glaze, but pretty close. And then this is where I'm going to come back. I have some basil from our garden. This is the Thai basil. So I'm going to strip off some of the bottom leaves. I'll chop those up. And then I'll just use the top as a bit of a garnish over here. It smells great when you strip those leaves down. It just smells awesome. And then a little chopping. I don't want it minced so that it's super fine. You want to get a piece of basil that, you know, kind of gives you the flavor and pops in your mouth. So a little sprinkle of that on top. And I love that smell, the smell of that. It's great. And then I can come back. I do the potatoes. And these will set up a lot. So, you know, keep that in mind as you're mashing them and adding liquid. As they cool, they'll definitely firm up. So if you had cold mashed potatoes, you've noticed that once they're cold, they totally set. But if they're hot, they're a little bit on the soft side. So I like mine to be a little bit on the chunkier side. So you could put these in a mixer and use a paddle and eliminate all lumps, but I like a little bit of chunk in there. So that's where we're going to go with this. And again, the color is always just amazing. And it doesn't need any extra fat because we added that little bit of coconut milk that we had. And then I can just come back for this one. Maybe get some of the nice uallah leaves. Put it in there as a garnish. And then the last thing we've got to take a look at is the casserole. This is nice and hot. So I've got the one in there cooking and then the one that I started earlier and baked. You can see it browned up nicely around the edges. The top here in the front, it looks like it got a little hot. It's a little darker than I would tend to like it. It looks almost burnt. So if that happens to you and you have a layer of crumbs, you can just take a spoon, take that top layer off. I actually like that. My grandmother used to eat like burnt toast. So I picked that up from her. So the really heavily toasted bread I still eat to this day. And my wife thinks I'm crazy, but she doesn't like it like that. She likes it lightly toasted. I like it nice and dark. But if you're serving it and you don't want it to look too dark, you can do that. Spread it around. Okay.
I have a comment. It's beautiful from
Oh.
Ingrid.
And then this would just be spooned out. It's still kind of hot. You got to be careful with it. It would just be spooned out onto a plate. It could be served with regular vegetables on the side or any sort of thing. More often than not, you put everything into a casserole so that it's a complete dish when it's done. This one doesn't have any protein in it necessarily, but you could easily add protein to it so that it was all in one dish. So that's basically it for tonight. I know 3 is kind of a lot to run through. If there's other questions, we could take them, as I know we got about 5 minutes or so before Dr. Ahmed jumps in and fills us in on some more details about uallah. But yeah, happy to take any questions you might have.
No, we're good. I just had a comment from one of the viewers that they said that your presentation is beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Hopefully it will taste great as well. These are also really good if you do have leftover of the mashed potatoes. It makes a nice soup. If you thin it out with a little vegetable stock, or if you thin it out with a little chicken stock or whatever it is you're using, even water, just to a soup consistency, it works great for that. And you could add vegetables and things to that if you wanted to. Actually, in college, I always took home the mashed potatoes and I kept them in a crock pot and thinned them out. So that was like my staple go-to meal in my college days, is like potato soup. So it works really, really well for that. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll look forward to the information session that we're going to have here with Dr. Ahmed. And then I'll look forward also to next week where we'll be coming at you with ulu, I believe. I have some growing in my neighbor's tree. We've got some growing in the garden down below here. So we'll pick some fresh ones and show you some really interesting dishes with that.
Well, Dan, if you don't mind just sticking around in case questions come up for you, we'll go to those questions from Dr. Ahmed, and then, okay, excellent. Lonnie, are you good to go?
Yes, I'm good to go.
Okay, and Dr. Ahmad, if you don't mind turning on your microphone. And
I already did. Aloha, everybody.
Okay.
Now it's
Excellent.
my pleasure to introduce our special guest, Dr. Hamjad Hamed from the UH College of Tropical Agriculture. Dr. Hamed will be talking to us about where and how uallah grows, when and how to harvest it, and where to purchase it.
And he'll be answering those 4 questions.
Yes.
Of course. Aloha, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me over. I appreciate it. My name is Amjad. My last name is Ahmed. I know it's not a common name. Sorry about that. And I got my PhD from UH Manoa. And I've been in Hawaii since then. It's been about 17 years here in Hawaii. Usually by the end of every year, people asking me, where are you gonna go for vacation? I say, I'm in Hawaii. I am on a long-term vacation, so I don't leave the islands. The topic of sweet potato is a one very important topic. It's one of the most stable food here in Hawaii. It grows all over the state. I have a short presentation. I want to just talk a little bit about the school and also a little bit some information about the sweet potato, and then I'm going to go into the questions if you guys don't mind that order.
Sounds good.
And share screen. I'm looking for my presentation. That's the one. Share, and I'm gonna go for full screen. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes, it's clear.
Awesome. Although the topic is in Hawaii, but just because most of the information is from Hawaii, my name is Amjad Ahmed. I am an extension agent of Sustainable and Organic Agriculture Program at CTAR. That's the College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, part of the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Just in case, if you are interested in knowing or reaching out to some of us, like I am station on Oahu, and we have other counties as well. We have extension agents all over the state. And if you are on one of the islands or the counties and you would like to reach out, you can find your extension agents just going into CTAR website. That's going to look something like this in the picture. You go into the departments, and from there on units, look for the island name. It's going to be on the left side. And then from there, you are going to find the extension offices in your area. It depends on the county. And then you will be able to reach out to the people on each county to reach out to ask for more questions or some guidance about crops and pests and so on. There was a question about the yam and sweet potato. So I got this slide kind of very fast, looking into the difference between the yam and the sweet potato. They are mostly, on the yam side, they are more dry. They have more fibers in them. They are more starchy and dark in color. When you come to the sweet potato, it's a more of a moist flesh, very thinner comparing with the yam. Also, it varies in color. It has more sugar, but also it has good amount of starch in it. And again, it varies in color comparing with the yam. In this picture here, you can see different types of sweet potato. You have the white, the yellow, the purple, the orange, so many different colors. They vary in the color mainly due to differences in antioxidants content. Like, for example, in the orange is like the carrots. They have what's called the beta carotene, that it's one of the antioxidants. And then, for example, in the purple one, it's the anthocyanin. Those are different types of antioxidants. They are healthy. They improve usually the heart, and also they known to fight cancers inside the body. That's why it's usually recommended to go into this type of sweet potato, just because they have, or any crops that they have those antioxidants. So it's like a natural medicine comes with the food. When it comes to the sweet potato, there is a publication from CTAR. It's a bit old. This is the link to it, and I'm gonna send this one to Jackie so she can share it with everybody later today. As far as sweet potato, you can grow it in the ground, and also you can grow it in containers. I saw a very beautiful pattern where they had their it's a house, and they wanted to kind of surround their garden. What they did, they took those old tires, they put them next to each other, and it became like a short fence. In there, you put the media in, and then you put the sweet potato cuttings. From time to time, when they harvest, they just empty everything, and then they start over again. It was very nice of growing sweet potato. In general, people they grow sweet potato by letting the sweet potato itself to germinate, and then they plant those germinated. In Hawaii, we usually have always sweet potato, so we rely heavily on cuttings. If you want to go with cuttings, you want to take it about a foot long, each of the cuttings. And before planting, you want to cut most of the leaves. Why you want to cut most of the leaves? Because there is no roots. You don't want the leaves to continue breathing and losing water when we don't have roots to absorb back amount of water. So you don't want the plant to stress out from early stages. So you cut most of the leaves out of it. You can even like bury like almost no leaves, or only like the few tips you can leave. You plant them. Usually you plant them either straight all the way down, or you can put them in an angle to increase the surface of that cuttings that reaches and in touch with the soil, so you have more chances of developing roots. Now, if you get cuttings and then you are not ready with the ground to plant immediately, don't panic. You put these cuttings in water. They will root over time and gives you about a couple of weeks extra time to prepare the soil, and then you can plant them. So you can just elongate the life of the cuttings by just putting them in water till you are ready to plant. These two pictures showing that you can grow them in the ground and you can grow them also in containers. Either ways, at some point when they keep growing, especially when they start flowering, that's a good time to start hailing the soil closer to the plant, or if you are growing in container, add more media. Why is that? The chance when you are adding more media or soil around the plants, the chance of producing more tubers and roots will increase. Sweet potato is one of the crops that loves extra potassium. So when you are growing sweet potato and you are looking for fertilizer that you want to add, you want to look for the one that has more potassium. Usually any fertilizer, it will have 3 numbers. The first one for the nitrogen, the second one is for the phosphorus, and the third one for the potassium. They call it NPK. Nancy, people, K, night, right? So always the third one is potassium. When you are growing sweet potato, look into the last number and pick up the highest one. Like for example, 10, 10, 20, 15, 15, 30, something like that. More potassium because sweet potato loves more potassium. And what we found is with the additional of potassium, the yield as a quality and the yield as an amount both improved of sweet potato. That's actually what I wanted to share with you in regard to the best location to grow sweet potato. In Hawaii, in fact, you can grow sweet potato all over. They love more moist areas, or if you are in a dry areas, you can make sure to irrigate the sweet potato more often. It loves more of a loose soil rather than the clay, because don't forget that we pick up the roots. And if you have heavy clay soil, the compaction and the connection between the soil particles will resist of the roots to go bigger. So what you want to do if you are in a clay soil area, sorry about that, what you want to do, you add more compost, because compost will help the soil to become more fluffy, loose. This one is going to reduce that compaction and will help the roots to grow bigger. As far as irrigation, you want to keep the soil moist as much as possible, but not saturated, because the plant, any plant, breathe also from its roots. So you don't want the soil to be saturated. You suffocate kind of the roots. In addition to that, I believe the best time to grow sweet potato in Hawaii is between March and May. However, you can grow it any time in the year, but you don't expect the same amount of yield every time you grow it. So the best time is between March and May, and you are going to harvest after 4 to 6 weeks. It depends on the variety. It depends on your area, because although Hawaii is very small, but we have what's called microclimates. Sometimes a few acres, a few miles, and you are in a different temperature, different elevation, soil type, all of this changes. So that's why between 4 to 6 months after you plant, usually you harvest. Again, March to May, that's the best time to plant, but you can also plant, for example, in November and December. However, don't expect the same amount of yield when you get to plant between March and May. I would like to start answering any questions, and then we can go and explain more stuff over time.
Sure, I do have a question from Allison.
Please.
Sometime when I cut open an Okinawan sweet potato, I noticed black areas scattered throughout the potato, and the black parts taste bitter. What causes the black areas and the bitterness? There has been times when I had to throw away the whole potato.
Yep, I agree with that. Most likely it is root knot nematode. Those root knot nematode are it's a very tiny, small, microscopic pest that they grow in the soil. And what they do, they attack the roots. And don't forget, again, sweet potato is roots, technically. It's inflating roots. So they attack them. And as a mechanism of defense of the plant, it tried to square that root knot the nematode by kind of building harder cells around them.
Mm.
But at the same time, it become that the black one, and also it become very bitter. It's kind of again a defense mechanism. Now, the same kind of mechanism is actually building of antioxidants. It's fascinating, this plant science, because technically, if you don't irrigate the sweet potato well, or you don't fertilize it well, you're going to increase the amount of antioxidants in the sweet potato. However, you're going to also reduce the yield. The accumulation of antioxidants is a more of a defense mechanism rather than anything else. So sweet potato, purple sweet potato, will always accumulate the cythianine, which is the antioxidant. However, usually under stress condition, you're going to have more of the antioxidants comparing with more lush condition. It's just part of the plant life. So those most likely are root knot nematode, that they are attacking the plant, and it's a plant mechanism to defense. It builds kind of thicker. They also like very hard. It's like they are fibrous points, those black ones. And yes, most likely you're gonna throw everything. It's just because that concentration of the defense mechanism, it's spread out all over, and it become the plant. The sweet potato is very bitter. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions, about 10 of them. And what is haling and haling soil?
Yeah, haling the soil is, as you see here in this picture, you see the kind of the rounds that we made, the mounds that we made here to grow the sweet potato. At some point, when the sweet potatoes start flowering, we start coming with the shovel. We take some of the soil in from the lower portion of the mounds, and we push it more toward the plant. What you are doing, you are increasing the area where usually the tubers or the roots are growing. So you are increasing the area here. You see this mound here? You are increasing its area to make sure that the plant has more chance with the soil to grow more, bigger, and more number of roots. That's what's haling the soil.
Okay, some purple uallah, very dark, and others very light in color. Is there a way to tell which is which when purchasing?
It's hard to tell. It's until you open it. And that's, again, it's an antioxidant accumulation. It varies sometimes. It depends sometimes, and it's not always, but sometimes, in many cases, it's how is the plant is growing. Again, those antioxidants usually are defense mechanism. They accumulate in more cases, they accumulate in a larger amount when the plant is under stress. So where is the balance? You want more antioxidants because they are healthy, but then if you stress the plant, the yield will go down. So where is the balance in between? Some people talk about what's called acute stress, where you shock the plant for a short time, then you, for example, irrigate it back again. You don't give it fertilizer, then you give it fertilizer. Nobody knows exactly how to exactly maximize both benefits. But it's usually, you really don't know. It just depends on the growth condition of the sweet potato.
There's a question also. Are sweet potatoes high in potassium? Since they like, okay, sweet potatoes high in potassium, since they like potassium. So
this is like a question, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a possibility you can link that, but usually what we found that there is a difference between a plant growth and nutrient accumulation. We found that the plant loves extra potassium and it does well in yield, but that might be related that the plant leaves and stems and the photosynthesis processes loves more potassium. It doesn't mean it's accumulation in the roots. So maybe for some of the varieties, but not all of them, you want you want the crops that they are rich with the nutrients, but sometimes they become toxic. So you want yes, it can be, but it's not always related.
We have a lot more questions and not much time.
Okay,
but
do you mind if I jump in there, Lonnie?
Go ahead, go ahead.
So just to get to some of the ones that are related to the cooking really quickly, are there specific places that you can buy uallah sweet potatoes?
No, nothing really specific. It just depends really on your area, where you can find them. Also, in fact, especially since the pandemic, we found that there are farmers, they went online. They start selling on Etsy, they start selling on eBay. So you can actually find them online. You get the Hawaiian ones online. So it just really
not
depends.
At the farmer's market?
Definitely you can find them on the farmer's market, definitely.
Excellent.
Because with the farmer's market, it depends on usually from the area where they come from. So you may find different variety. You may not find all the varieties you are looking for.
I know I keep looking for those deep purple ones and I can never find them. And yet Dan seems to have them. So I'm gonna have to figure out where he gets them. So just really quickly, well, let's see if we can race through these. And if you have to go, but Terry wants to know, Dr. Ahmad, how does he know when his sweet potatoes are ready to harvest?
It's usually 4 to 6 months after you plant them. And also there are kind of, I would say some indicators, like for example, the part of the green, part of the leaves and stem will start kind of a little bit dying back.
And
Yellowing.
how long does it usually take for the sweet potato to mature?
4 to 6 months.
Oh, long time.
Yes, it's 4 to 6 months. It depends on the varieties, but 4 to 6 months, and you don't want to leave it in the soil after that, because they will start declining. Some pests will start attacking them. They will rot, and so on.
Are there any sweet potato leaves that are toxic? Can you eat all sweet potato leaves?
I would rather to cook them fully, if people are familiar with the taro leaves, you have to cook them really well to make sure you break down the toxic chemicals in them. I would do the same thing with the sweet potato.
So any kind of sweet potato, as long as it's cooked fully?
I would rather to cook them well. Yes, if you cook them well, most likely. Plus, keep in your mind, some of the green leaves type, they also store nitrogen. And nitrogen can be also toxic for humans because they combine instead of the oxygen in our bloodstream. So rather to cook them, this way you are breaking down all those chemicals that may accumulate in the leaves.
Okay. Are there any tips that you have for selecting a sweet potato when in the grocery store? And just to combine this with another question, are there different names for the sweet potatoes? It's that people should be looking for if they want that deep purple. Is it called anything besides uallah?
No other names beside that, known, at least from what I know. And as far as looking into sweet potato selecting, really depends on what you are looking for. I would say, as long as you don't see from outside cuts and bruises, it depends really. Some bruises in the sweet potato, there are some of them you can tell they are from insects when they were growing. Some of them is just from the harvest. When we harvest, in many cases we touch the roots because we don't know when we are shoveling to get the roots out, we don't know exactly where are the roots. Sometimes we cut them and bruise them when we are harvesting, but in general, if the roots they look good, you should be able to get them. Avoid the germinating ones, mainly as if only the eyes start a little bit. Sweet potato has kind of like holes in them that we call them eyes. That's where they germinate back from. If you want to plant them again, as long as the plants are not really coming out of it, it should be okay. Otherwise, the plants will start dissolving what's inside of it to support the growing plants. Before that, should be any type of sweet potato should be okay.
Thank you. And I just want to mention to folks, Jan Joan is saying FarmLink Hawaii sometimes has them. FarmLink Hawaii is online. They have lots of the local foods that we're going to be talking about. And if you're on Oahu, you can get delivery for that food. So if you're looking for ulu, that's a good place to go. And then last question here from Jan. How do you deal with the sweet potato weevil?
That's one of the hardest. Even for us is hard because you don't want to add too much chemicals. The things is with the weevils is they lay the eggs when the plant is just growing, and the eggs will develop inside the sweet potato when they are in storage. So the best thing to do is buy the sweet potato and use it immediately. Don't store it for a long time. This way you are cooking it, you are stopping the eggs of the weevils from developing, and everything is good. Storing it, that's where is the issue. Unless you know exactly there is no weevils, and it's hard to tell in many cases. So
thank you. And we have gone 5 minutes over. And so we really want to thank you, Dr. Ahmad, for staying on, and all of you at home for staying on. We hope that you liked our add-on of learning a little bit about how to grow, because we're going to be doing this for the next 5 weeks. And hopefully we'll have a video link for Dr. Ahmad for next week. But thank you so much, Chef Dan and Lonnie and Dr. Ahmad and Alice and David and Cindy. Great program, and I'm looking forward to trying some of those delicious sweet potato dishes. So mahalo, everybody, and have a great evening.